Hey, it's working! Excellent! We are in. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to participate in a more active way, then you can visit us at youtube.com/ProjectLegion008. So we are actively working on, we're going to be reading a story today. We're going to be reading the Belgariad. We're going to be recording probably 2 chapters. We're going to see. Hey, Google, set the AC to 72. And so, there we go. Cool. All right. Unfortunately, this video, I don't currently have YouTube Premium, so there will be ads running in the background as I read these today, which is what it is. If an ad pops up, maybe I'll stop reading. I don't know. What do you guys think? Should I just stop reading and then go ahead? Maybe next time. I don't know why I chose 72, but I did. Thank you very much, bud, for all the likes. I appreciate it. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and read. Now here's the situation on the read. Jeremy, are you going to be my chat man? Here's how this is gonna work. For those on YouTube, if there is anyone in YouTube, I have no idea if there is. But in YouTube land, I am streaming on TikTok. In TikTok land, streaming on YouTube. And I'm going to try to double whammy this and see where we're going. But Jeremy, if Jeremy's hanging out, then I know I've got someone in chat. Okay, no worries, Jeremy. Thanks for the heads up. I appreciate that. If you're in here and you're hanging out, we're reading a book. We're going to start at the very beginning. This is going to be chapter 1. And once I get started, I'm going to start recording, which means I'm not going to be paying attention to chat. If I am going to be paying attention to chat, I am probably going to be on a tangent of some kind, trying to teach something about the book, about the story. I like to do that. So, but I'm going to go ahead and start recording, and we'll see where this goes. I am going to have to learn how to edit. The more I am distracted by chat, the more I'm going to struggle with editing later. So we'll see how this goes. Or I might pay my friend to edit it for me. We'll see. Okay. Volume level's okay. Volume levels are a little high. Let's turn this audio input down a little bit. Okay. So, let's go ahead and get into this. Chapter 1. Oh, we need to go ahead and do an intro for the people at home. So, I'm gonna have to remember that. Okay, here we go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, know that you're loved. I am Legion. We are Legion. This is garbage. Ha 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 ha. Nice thing about it is I can start and stop recording as I need to and erase the garbage. So we're going to go ahead and stop that recording. We're going to go back up. We're going to show recordings. We're going to just go ahead and pretend that didn't happen. And we're going to delete it. Okay. These are supposed to be relatively free form, so we'll see how it goes. We'll see what happens. But, yeah. Let's go ahead and get into it. We'll try one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are, know that you are loved. I am Legion, and we are reading the Belgariad today. Know that there is a lot going on in the world right now, and if you're just here to listen to a story, know that that's okay. There will be small interruptions during this, as I tend to chat on TikTok or YouTube. But know that the recording as a whole will be edited down to just my wonderful voice and posted in its entirety on YouTube for everyone to watch. If you like the sound of my voice and you would like to participate, know that I may not catch you in chat, but if you're in chat, know that there are people in chat that will talk to you because you are loved. That's just how it works. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. Chapter 1. The first thing the boy Garion remembered was the kitchen at Fowler's farm. For all the rest of his life, he had a special warm feeling for kitchens and those peculiar sounds and smells that seemed somehow to combine into a bustling seriousness that had to do with love and food and comfort and security and, above all, home. No matter how high Garion rose in life, he never forgot what all his memories began in that kitchen. The kitchen at Fowler's farm was a large, low-beamed room filled with ovens and kettles and great spits that turned slowly in cavern-like arch fireplaces. There were long, heavy work tables where bread was kneaded into loaves and chickens were cut up and carrots and celery were diced with quick, crisp rocking movements of long, curved knives. When Garion was very small, he played under those tables and soon learned to keep his fingers and toes out from under the feet of the kitchen helpers who worked around them. And sometimes, in the late afternoon, when he grew tired, he would lie in the corner and stare into one of the flickering fires that gleamed and reflected back from the 100 polished pots and knives and long-handled spoons that hung from pegs along the whitewashed walls. And, all bemused, he would drift off into sleep in perfect peace and harmony with all the world around him. The corner of the kitchen and everything that happened there was Aunt Pole. She seemed somehow to be able to be everywhere all at once. The finishing touch that plumped a goose in its roasting pan or deftly shaped a rising loaf. We're going to pause real quick and we'll edit this out, just like I said I was going to. And we can go ahead and skip the ad. And we can continue. The finishing touch that plumped a goose in its roasting pan, or deftly shaped a rising loaf, or garnished a smoking ham fresh from the oven was always hers. Though there were several others who worked in the kitchen, no loaf, stew, soup, roast, or vegetable ever went out of it that had not been touched at least once by Aunt Pole. She knew by smell, taste, or some higher instinct that what each dish required, and she seasoned them all by pinch or trace, a negligent-seeming shake from earthenware spice pots. It was as if there was a kind of magic about her, a knowledge and a power beyond that of ordinary people, and yet, even at her busiest, she always knew precisely where Garion was, in the very midst of crimping a pie crust or decorating a special cake or stitching up a freshly stuffed chicken. She could, without looking, reach out a leg and hook him back out from under the feet of others with a heel or ankle. As he grew a bit older, it even became a game. Garion would watch until she seemed far too busy to notice him, and then, laughing, he would run. Turning the page. He would run on his sturdy little legs toward a door, But she would always catch him, and he would laugh and throw his arms around her neck and kiss her, and then go back to watching for his next chance to run away again. He was quite convinced in those early years that his Aunt Pole was quite the most important and beautiful woman in the world. For one thing, she was taller than the other women on Falder's farm, very nearly as tall as a man, and her face was always serious, even stern. Except with him. Of course, her hair was long and very dark, almost black. All but one lock just above her left brow, which was white as new snow. At night, when she tucked him into a little bed close beside her own in their private room above the kitchen, he would reach out and touch that white lock. She would smile at him and touch his face with a soft hand. Then he would sleep, content in the knowledge that she was there watching over him. Falder's farm lay very nearly in the center of Sendaria, a misty kingdom in the border on the west by the Sea of the Winds, and on the east by the Gulf of Cherik. Like all farmhouses in that particular time and place, Falder's farmstead was not one building or two, but rather was a solidly constructed complex of sheds and barns, and hen roosts and dovecotes, all facing inward upon a central yard with a stout gate at the front. Along the second-story gallery were the rooms, some spacious, some quite tiny, in which lived the farmlands who tilled and planted and weeded the extensive fields beyond the walls. Falder himself lived in the quarters in the square tower above the central dining hall where his workers assembled 3 times a day, sometimes 4 during harvest time, to feast on the bounty of Aunt Pole's kitchen. All in all, it was quite a happy and harmonious place. Farmer Falder was a good master. He was a tall, serious man with a long nose and an even longer jaw. Though he seldom laughed or even smiled, he was kindly to those who worked for him, and seemed more intent on maintaining them all in health and well-being than extracting the last possible ounce of sweat from them. In many ways, he was more like a father than a master to the 60-odd people who lived on his freeholding. He ate with them, which was unusual, since many farmers in the district sought to hold themselves aloof from their workers, and his presence at the head of the central table in the dining hall exerted a restraining influence on some of the younger ones who tended sometimes to be boisterous. Farmer Falder was a devout man, and he invariably invoked with simple eloquence the blessing of the gods before each meal. The people of his farm, knowing this, filed with some decorum into the dining hall before each meal and sat in the semblance at least of piety before attacking the heaping platters and bowls of food that Aunt Pole and her helpers had placed before them. Because of Falder's good heart and the magic of Aunt Pole's deft fingers, the farm was known throughout the district as the finest place to live and work for 20 leagues in any direction. Whole evenings were spent in the tavern in the nearby village of Upper Grault, in minute descriptions of the near miraculous meals served regularly in Falder's dining hall. Less fortunate men who worked at other farms were frequently seen, after several pots of ale, to weep openly at description of one of Aunt Pole's roasted geese, and the fame of Falder's farm spread wide throughout the district. The most important man on the farm, aside from Falder, was Dernick, the smith. As Garion grew older and was allowed to move out from under Aunt Pole's watchful eye, he found his way inevitably to the smithy. The glowing iron that came from Dernick's forge had an almost hypnotic attraction for him. Dernick was an ordinary-looking man with plain brown hair and a plain face, ruddy from the heat of his forge. He was neither tall nor short, nor was he thin or stout. He was sober and quiet, and like most men who followed his trade, he was enormously strong. He wore a rough leather jerkin and an apron of the same material. Both were spotted with burns from the sparks which flew from his forge. He also wore tight-fitting hose and soft leather boots, as was the custom in that part of Sandaria. At first, Dernick's only words to Garion were warnings to keep his fingers away from the forge and the glowing metal which came from it. In time, however, he and the boy became friends, and he spoke more frequently. "Always finish what you set your hand to," he would advise. "It's bad for the iron if you set it aside and then take it back to the fire more than is needful."
"Why is that?" Garion would ask. Dernick would shrug. "Just is. Always do the very best job you can," he said on another occasion as he put the last few finishing touches with a file on the metal parts of the wagon he was repairing.
"But that goes underneath," Garion said. "No one will ever see it." "But I know it's there," Dernick said, still smoothing the metal. "If it isn't done as well as I can do it, I'll be ashamed every time I see this wagon go by, and I'll see the wagon every day." And so it went. Without even intending to, Dernick instructed the small boy in those solid Sandarian virtues of work, thrift, sobriety, good manners, and practicality, which formed the backbone of society. Pausing for commercial! How's everybody doing? Will you pray for my dad, Dixon Maez? I don't normally pray, but I will send my vibes, my dude. I don't know what is wrong with your dad, but if you want to talk about it, I'm here, my dude. I am not going to go ahead and order you a pizza. Okay. Alright, we're going to get ready to skip, and we're back in the story. At first, Aunt Pole worried about Garion's attraction to the smithy with its obvious dangers. But after watching from her kitchen door for a while, she realized that Dernick was almost as watchful of Garion's safety as she was herself, and she became less concerned. "If the boy becomes pestersome, good man Dernick, send him away," she told the smith on one occasion when she had brought a large copper kettle to the smithy to be patched. "Or tell me, and I'll keep him closer to the kitchen." "He's no bother, Mistress Pole," Dernick said, smiling. "He's a sensible boy, and he knows enough to keep out of the way." "You're too good-natured, friend Dernick," Aunt Pole said. "The boy is full of questions. Answer one and a dozen more come out." "That's the way of boys," Dernick said, carefully pouring bubbling metal into the small clay ring he had placed around the tiny hole in the bottom of the kettle. "I was questioning myself when I was a boy. My father and old Barl, the smith who taught me, were patient enough to answer what they could. I'd repay them poorly if I didn't have the same patience with Garion." Pausing for a moment as the life lesson is here. Hey Fry, I'm glad you're here. Life lesson here. Passing on the positives from your past is absolutely something you should strive to do. You should strive to teach those the things that worked for you in your past. It may not apply to every person's situation, but being there and being ready to pass on the positive aspects of your life are always important. I got a little off track there, but I think the message is still there. Let's get back into it. Garion, who was sitting nearby, had held his breath during this conversation. He knew that one wrong word on either side would have instantly banished him from the smithy. As Aunt Pole walked back across the hard-packed dirt of the yard toward her kitchen with the new mended kettle, he noticed the way that Dernick watched her, and an idea began to form in his mind. It was a simple idea, and the beauty of it was that it provided something for everyone. "Aunt Pole," he said that night, wincing as she washed one of his ears with a rough cloth. "Yes?" she said, turning her attention to his neck. "Why don't you marry Dernick?" She stopped washing. "What?" she asked. "I think it would be an awfully good idea." "Oh, do you?" Her voice had a slight edge to it, and Garyon knew he was on dangerous ground. "He likes you," he said defensively, "and I suppose you've already discussed this with him?" "No," he said. "I thought I'd talk to you about it first." "At least that was a good idea." "I can tell him about it tomorrow morning if you'd like." His head was turned around quite firmly by one ear. Aunt Pole, Garyon felt, found his ears far too convenient. "Don't you so much as breathe one word of this nonsense to Dernick, or anyone else," she said, her dark eyes burning into his with a fire he had never seen there before. "It was only a thought," he said quickly. "Very bad one. From now on, leave thinking to the grown-ups." She was still holding his ear. Anything you say," he agreed hastily. Later that night, however, when they lay in their beds in the quiet darkness, he approached the problem obliquely. "Aunt Pole?" "Yes?" "Since you don't want to marry Dernick, who do you want to marry?" "Garyon," she said. "Yes?" "Close your mouth and go to sleep." "I think I've got a right to know," he said in an injured tone. "Garyon!" "All right, I'm going to sleep, but I don't think you've been very fair about all this." She had drew in a deep breath. "Very well," she said. "I'm not thinking of getting married. I've never thought of getting married, and I seriously doubt that I ever think of getting married. I have far too many important things to attend to for any of that." "Don't worry, Aunt Pole," he said, wanting to put her mind at ease. "When I grow up, I'll marry you." She laughed, then a deep, rich laugh, and reached out to touch his face in the darkness. "Oh no, my Garyon," she said. "There's another wife in store for you." "Who?" he demanded. "You'll find out," she said mysteriously. "Now go to sleep." "Aunt Pole?" "Yes?" "Where's my mother?" It was a question he had been meaning to ask for quite some time. There was a long pause. Then Aunt Pole sighed. "She died," she said quietly. Garyon felt a sudden wrenching surge of grief, an unbearable anguish. He began to cry. And then she was beside his bed. She knelt on the floor and put her arms around him. Finally, a long time later, after she had carried him to her own bed and held him close until his grief had run its course, Garyon had asked brokenly, "What was she like, my mother?" "She was fair-haired," Aunt Pole said, "and very young and very beautiful. Her face was gentle, and she was very happy." "Did she love me?" "More than you could imagine." And then he cried again, but his crying was quieter now, more regretful than anguished. Aunt Pole held him closely until he cried himself to sleep. There were other children on Falder's farm, as was only natural in a community of 60 or so. The older ones on the farm all worked, but there were 3 other children of about Garion's age on the freeholding. These 3 became his playmates and his friends. The oldest boy was named Runderig, and he was a year or 2 older than Garion and quite a bit taller. Ordinarily, since he was the eldest of the children, Runderig would have been their leader, but because he was an errand, his sense was a bit limited, and he cheerfully deferred to the younger ones. The kingdom of Sandaria, unlike other kingdoms, was inhabited by a broad variety of racial stocks. Cheriks, Algors, Drosnians, Arans, and even a substantial number of Telnedrons had emerged to form the elemental Sendar. Arans, of course, were very brave, but were also notoriously thick-witted. Garion's second playmate was Darun, a small, quick boy whose background was so mixed that he could only be called a Sendar. The most notable thing about Darun was the fact that he was always running. He never walked if he could run. Like his feet, his mind seemed to tumble over itself, and his tongue as well. He talked continuously and very fast, and was always excited. We're going to pause for this, see where we're at.
Get started for free.
And we're skipping this. The undisputed leader of the little foursome was the girl Zubret. I'm going to turn this down just a hair more. The undisputed leader of the little foursome was the girl Zubret, a golden-haired charmer who invented their games, made up stories to tell to them, and sent them to stealing apples and plums from Falder's orchard for her. She ruled them as a little queen, playing one against the other and inciting them into fights. She was quite heartless, and each of the 3 boys at times hated her even while remaining helpless thralls to her tiniest whim. In the winter, they slid on wide boards down the snowy hillside behind the farmhouse and returned home, wet and snow-covered, with chapped hands and glowing cheeks as evening's purple shadows crept across the snow. Or, after Dernick the smith had proclaimed the ice safe, they would slide endlessly across the frozen pond that lay glittering frostily in a little dale just to the east of the farm buildings along the road to Upper Grault. And, if the weather was too cold, or on toward spring when rains and warm winds had made the snow slushy and the pond unsafe, they would gather in the hay barn and leap by the hour from the loft into the soft hay beneath, filling their hair with chaff and their noses with dust that smelled of summer. In the spring, they caught pollywogs along the marshy edges of the pond and climbed trees to stare in wonder at tiny blue eggs the birds had laid in twiggy nests in the high branches. It was Darun, naturally, who fell from a tree and broke his arm one fine spring morning when Zubret urged him into the highest branches of a tree near the edges of the pond. Since Runderig had stood helplessly gaping at his injured friend, and Zubret had run away almost before he hit the ground, it fell to Garion to make certain necessary decisions. Gravely, he considered the situation for a moment, then his young face seriously intent beneath his shock of sandy hair. The arm was obviously broken, and Darun, pale and frightened, bit his lip to keep from crying. A movement caught Garion's eye, and he glanced up quickly. A man in a dark cloak sat astride a large black horse not far away, watching intently when their eyes met. Garion felt a momentary chill, and he knew that he had seen the man before. That indeed that dark figure had hovered on the edge of his vision for as long as he could remember, never speaking, but always watching. There was, in that silent scrutiny, a kind of cold animosity, curiously mingled with something that was almost, but not quite, fear. Then Darun whimpered, and Garion turned back. Carefully, he bound the injured arm across the front of Darun's body with his rope belt, and then he and Runderig helped the injured boy to his feet. At least he could have helped. Oh. At least he could have helped us, Garion said resentfully. Who? Runderig said, looking around. Garion turned to point at the dark-cloaked man, but the rider was gone. I didn't see anyone, Runderig said. It hurts, Darun said. Don't worry, Garion said. Aunt Pole can fix it. And so she did. When the three appeared at the door of her kitchen, she took in the situation with a single glance. Bring him over here, she told them, her voice not even excited. She set the pale and violently trembling boy on a stool near one of the ovens and mixed a tea of several herbs taken from earthenware jars on a high shelf in the back of one of her pantries. Drink this, she instructed Darun, handing him a steaming mug. Will it make my arm well? Darun asked, suspiciously eyeing the evil-smelling brew. Just drink it, she ordered, laying out some splints and linen strips. Yeah, it tastes awful, Darun said, making a face. It's supposed to, she told him. Drink it all. I don't think I want any more, he said. Very well. She said. She pushed back the splints and took down a long, very sharp knife from a hook on the wall. What are you gonna do with that? He demanded shakily. Since you don't want to take the medicine, she said blandly, I guess it'll have to come off. Off? Darun squeaked, his eyes bulging. Probably about right there, she said thoughtfully, touching his arm at the elbow with the point of a knife. Tears coming to his eyes, Darun gulped down the rest of the liquid, and a few minutes later he was nodding, almost drowsing on his stool. He screamed once, though, when Aunt Pole set the broken bone, but after the arm had been wrapped and splinted, he drowsed again. Aunt Pole spoke briefly with the boy's frightened mother, and then had Dernick carry him to bed. You wouldn't have really cut off his arm, Garion said. Aunt Pole looked at him, her expression unchanging. Oh, she said. He was no longer sure. I think I'd like to have a word with Mistress Zubret now, she said then. She ran away when Darun fell out of the tree, Garion said. Find her. She's hiding, Garion protested. She's always hiding when something goes wrong. I wouldn't know where to look for her. Garion, Aunt Pole said, I didn't ask if you knew where to look. I told you to find her and bring her to me. What if she won't come? Garion hedged. Garion! There was a note of awful finality in Aunt Pole's tone, and Garion fled. Perfect place to pause. How you doing? Oh, I'm frozen. I've been frozen for a while. My camera's frozen. Why is my camera frozen? That's not good. Deactivate. Activate. There we go. I wonder how long that was dead for. We're going to go ahead and skip the next one here. I didn't have anything to do with it, Zubret lied as soon as Garion led her to Aunt Pole in the kitchen. You, Aunt Pole said, pointing at a stool. Sit. Zubret sank onto the stool, her mouth open and her eyes wide. You, Aunt Pole said to Garion, pointing at the kitchen door. Out! Garion left hurriedly. 10 minutes later, a sobbing little girl stumbled out of the kitchen. Aunt Pole stood in the doorway looking after her with eyes as hard as ice. "Did you thrash her?" Garion asked hopefully. Aunt Pole withered him with a glance. "Of course not," she said. "You don't thrash girls." "I would have," Garion said, disappointed. "What did you do to her?" "Don't you have anything to do?" Aunt Pole asked. "No," Garion said, "not really." That, of course, was a mistake. "Good," Aunt Pole said, finding one of his ears. "It's time you've started to earn your way. You'll find some dirty pots in the scullery. I'd like to have them scrubbed." I don't know why you're angry with me," Garion objected, squirming. "Wasn't my fault that Darun went up that tree." "The scullery, Garion," she said. "Now!" The rest of that spring and the early part of the summer were quiet. Darun, of course, could not play until his arm mended, and Zubret had been so shaken by whatever it was that Aunt Pole had said to her that she avoided the two other boys. Garion was left with only Runderig to play with, and Runderig was not bright enough to be much fun. Because there was really nothing else to do, the boys often went into the fields to watch the hands work and listen to their talk. As it happened, during that particular summer, the men on Falder's farm were talking about the Battle of Vomimber, the most cataclysmic event in the history of the West. Garion and Runderig listened, enthralled, as the men unfolded the story of how the hordes of Kal Turek had quite suddenly struck into the West some 500 years before. It had all begun in 4865, as men reckoned time in that part of the world, when vast multitudes of Murgos and Nadraks and Thols had struck down across the mountains of Nadrak Forest into Drasnia, and behind them in endless waves had come the uncountable numbers of the Malorians. After Drasnia had been brutally crushed and the Angarax had turned southward into the vast grasslands of Belgariad and had laid siege to that enormous fortress called the Angarian Stronghold. The siege had lasted for 8 years, until finally, in disgust, Kal Turek had abandoned it. It was not until he turned his army westward into Olgaland that the other kingdoms became aware that Angarak invasion was directed not only against the Alorns, but against all of the West. In the summer of 4875, Kal Turek had come down upon the Arendish plain before the city of Vomimber, and it was there that the combined armies of the West awaited them. The senders who participated in the battle were a part of the force under the leadership of Brand, the Riven Warder. That force, consisting of Rivens, Sendars, and Asturians, or Arans, assaulted the Angarak rear after the left had been engaged by Algars, Drasnians, and Ulgos, the right by Tol Nadarn and Cherix, and the front of the legendary charge of the Membran Arans. For hours the battle had raged until in the center of the field Brand had met in a single combat with Kal Turek himself. Upon that duel had hinged the outcome of the battle. Now, pausing for a moment, that 5 paragraphs is the worst 5 paragraphs I've ever read. They don't make sense. There's no context for any of this information coming at us. No one knows anything about what's happening here. It's meant to be a story, but unfortunately it just comes up as a bunch of word vomit. Yeah, Justin, we are reading the Belgariad. It's good to see you, my good sir. I hope you're having a fantastic day. We are recording right now, and we're live on YouTube as well, so I'm going to go ahead and keep reading here. So far, the stream has not populated any viewers, but that's okay. So, yes, not the Bulgarian, it is the Belgariad. Belgariad. The Belgariad. Not the Bulgarian, which is hilarious because you're the second person to post that. Okay, we are almost done with chapter 1. Let's finish this. Although 20 generations had passed since that titanic encounter, it was still as fresh in the memory of the Sendarian farmers who worked on Falder's farm as if it had happened only yesterday. Each blow was described, and each feint and parry at the final moment when it seemed that he must inevitably be overthrown. Brand had removed the covering from his shield, and Kaltarok, taken aback by some momentary confusion, had lowered his guard and had been instantly struck down. For Runderig, the description of the battle was enough to set his Erendish blood seething. Garion, however, found that certain questions had been left unanswered by the stories. Why was Brand's shield covered? He asked Kralto, one of the Aeons. Kralto shrugged. It just was, he said. Everyone I ever talked with about it agrees on that. Was it a magic shield? Garion persisted. It may have been, Kralto said, but I've never heard anyone say so. All I know is that when Bran uncovered his shield, Kaltarok dropped his own shield, and Bran stabbed his sword into Kaltarok's head through his eye, or so I'm told. Garion shook his head stubbornly. I don't understand, he said. How could something like that have made Kaltarok afraid? I can't say, Kralto told him. I've never heard anyone explain it. Despite his dissatisfaction with the story, Garion quite quickly agreed to Runderig's rather simple plan to reenact the duel. After a day or so of posturing, the banging at each other with sticks to stimulate swords, Garion decided that they needed some equipment to make the game more enjoyable. 2 kettles and 2 large pot lids mysteriously disappeared from Aunt Pole's kitchen, and Garion and Runderig, now with helmets and shields, repaired to a quiet place to do war upon each other. It was all... Oh, we're going to pause for our regularly scheduled break here. It was all going quite splendidly until Runderig was older, taller, and stronger, struck Garion a resounding whack on the head with his wooden sword. The rim of the kettle cut into Garion's eyebrow, and the blood began to flow. There was a sudden ringing in Garion's ears, and a kind of boiling exultation surged up in his veins as he rose to his feet from the ground. He never knew afterward quite what happened. He had only sketchy memory of shouting defiance at Kaltarok in words which sprang to his lips, and which even he did not understand. Runderig's familiar and somewhat foolish face was no longer the face before him, but rather was replaced by something hideously maimed and ugly. In a fury, Garion struck at that face again and again, with fire seething in his brain. And then it was over. Poor Runderig lay at his feet, beaten senseless by the enraged attack. Garion was horrified at what he had done, but at the same time there was the fiery taste of victory in his mouth. Later in the kitchen, where all injuries on the farm were routinely taken, Aunt Pole tended their wounds with only minimal comments about them. Runderig seemed not to be seriously hurt, though his face had begun to swell and turn purple in several places, and he had difficulty focusing his eyes at first. A few cold cloths on his head and one of Aunt Pole's potions quickly restored him. The cut on Garion's brow, however, required a bit more attention. She had Dernick hold the boy down, and then she took a needle and thread and sewed up the cut as calmly as she would have repaired a rip in a sleeve, all while ignoring the howls from her patient. All in all, she seemed much more concerned about the dented kettles and battered pot lids than about the war wounds of the two boys. When it was over, Garion had a headache and was taken up to bed. "At least I beat Kaltarak," he told Aunt Pole somewhat drowsily. She looked at him sharply. "Where did you hear about Tarak?" she demanded. "It's Kaltarak, Aunt Pole," Garion explained patiently. "Answer me." "The farmers were telling stories. Old Kralto and the others, about Brand and Vomimber and Kaltarak and all the rest. That's when Runderig and I were playing. I was Brand and he was Kaltarak. I didn't get to uncover my shield, though. Runderig hit me on the head before we got that far." Oh, I lost my spot. Oh, there we go. "I want you to listen to me, Garion," Aunt Pole said, "and I want you to listen carefully." I lost my spot again. Fail. What did I do? It's Oh, okay. There we go. "I want you to listen to me, Garion," Aunt Pole said, "and I want you to listen carefully. You are never to speak the name of Torak again." "It's Kaltarak, Aunt Pole," Garion explained again. "Not just Torak." Then she hit him, which she had never done before. The slap across his mouth surprised him more than it hurt, for she did not hit very hard. "You will never speak the name of Torak again. Ever," she said. "This is important, Garion. Your safety depends on it. I want you to promise." "You don't have to get so angry about it," he said in an injured tone. "Promise!" "All right, I promise. It was only a game." "Very foolish one," Aunt Pole said. "You might have killed Runderig." "What about me?" Garion protested. "You were never in any danger," she told him. "Now go to sleep." And as he dozed fitfully, his head light from his injury and the strange bitter drink his aunt had given him, he seemed to hear her deep, rich voice saying, "Garion, my Garion, you're too young yet." And later rising from deep sleep as a fish rises toward the silvery surface of the water, he seemed to hear her call, "Father, I need you." Then he plunged again into a troubled sleep, haunted by a dark figure of a man on a black horse, who watched his every movement with a cold animosity and something that hovered very near the edge of fear. And behind that dark figure he had always known to be there, but never overtly acknowledged, even to Aunt Pole, the maimed and ugly face he had briefly seen or imagined in the fight with Runderig loomed darkly, like the hideous fruit of an unspeakable tree. And so we're going to go ahead and stop recording there. We're not stopping the stream just yet. I'm just debating whether or not I want to read any more, and I don't think I do. I know that Chapter 2 is relatively short, but I can feel my voice giving out already, and I just started. So this is an endurance match. So we have a cute little cat for a bookmark. And we will go ahead and cease our stream there. There we go. I think that's what I'm after. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. No one was in YouTube, but that's okay. If anybody goes back to watch this, know that you are special and that you are loved. Everyone is loved. Everyone is loved. Some people more than others. Have a good night, guys. Thank you so much.